Thanks for tuning in to leftcoastnews.net. News and information from the wacky, sometimes communist, liberal west coast of the United States. For more, visit leftcoastnews.net.
Well, the bad news just keeps coming for good old Washington State when it comes to budget deficits or shortfalls of money, because we have a bunch of Democrats who don't know how to manage a budget or when to stop spending or when to stop taxing people. And even though we are one of the most heavily taxed states in the United States, it doesn't seem to be helping. As of October 2025, Washington State faces an ongoing budget deficit for the 2025-2027 biennium and beyond, despite legislative efforts earlier in the year to close a projected shortfall. The most recent revenue forecast, released in late September 2025, projects that tax collections will continue to fall below expectations. Why? Declining revenue. A September 2025 forecast from the Washington State Economic and Revenue Forecast Council showed that projected near general fund revenue for 2025 to 2029 dropped by about $903 million since June of 2025. This decline is attributed to lower than expected revenue from sales taxes, business and occupation taxes, and real estate taxes. That's because people aren't buying stuff, and you are running businesses out of this state. This state is not business friendly, and so businesses are moving elsewhere. Fiscal instability. The budget for 2025-27 biennium, which went into effect on July 1st, 2025, was balanced by state lawmakers through a combination of tax increases and spending cuts. However, the continued decline in tax receipts means the state began its new budget cycle with a shortfall. The state is mandated by law to balance its budget over a 4-year period. Washington's fiscal outlook will be further clarified by the next official revenue forecast in mid-November of this year, which will inform supplemental budget decisions for the 2026 legislative session. Contributing factors and causes. Increased spending prior to the 2025-27 budget. Some analysis highlighted the state's spending had grown faster than revenue, contributing to the budget gaps, slowing economy. A general slowdown in the national and state economies as a contributing factor to the weaker revenue forecasts. Federal funding, which we should not be relying on to pay our bills anyway. And pending legal action. A lawsuit by Comcast challenging a new sales tax on advertising services introduces additional uncertainty. Lawmakers have projected this tax would generate about $475 million over 4 years. Tax on everything, right? Because that works. Well, now we've got some new bad news that we get to worry about. Washington's innovative, and this is from the Washington State Standard, Washington's innovative paid family and medical leave program could be hundreds of millions of dollars in the red within a few years unless the legislature acts. Innovative. To tax working people and make them pay for other people to have time off. I remember when my kids were born, I got to use my sick leave that I had stored up to use for that purpose to take time off, or my vacation leave. Nobody paid for me to be off. Nobody else should be paying for anybody else's time off. This right here is socialism at work in Washington, where you are having money taken out of your paycheck without your consent and given to other people so they can have paid time off. This could mean reduced benefits or increased payments by the employers and employees who fund the program, which lets Washingtonians take paid time off for serious health issues or to care for a family member or a new child. The program's actuary says paid family and medical leave could face more than $350 million deficit in 2029. The state sets a premium rate annually for how much employers and employees need to pay into the program. This year, 0.92% of Washington workers' paychecks go towards it. Next year, that's going to increase to 1.13%, though the rate will be finalized at the end of this month. The problem is the state law caps premiums for the paid leave program at 1.2%. The state is projected to reach that cap in 2027 and stay there. That plateau means the program likely won't be able to keep up with rising claims for benefits and increased payments as wages grow. The program is steadily growing since its launch in 2020. From July 1st, 2024 to June 30th, over 320,000 applications were submitted for paid leave, up 15% from the previous year. According to a report this month, over 240,000 Washingtonians received more than $2 billion in total benefits, a year-over-year increase of about $300 million. Why are this many people having to take time off? Of course, this system is being abused because people abuse sick leave. People abuse any kind of leave they can, any reason to get out of work. The state's just making it easy for them, and we, those of us who work, get to pay for it. Legislation approved this year extending job protections for those who use this paid leave is likely to encourage even more people to use it. Good plan. This plan is too popular to not be better funded, said Steve Conway, Democrat of Tacoma. The program already has periodic deficits as it falls behind in paying out claims before receiving premium payments each quarter. But the problem a few years down the road would be a sustained deficit resulting in not enough money to dole out benefits without legislators backfilling funding. In 2023, faced with a program already more popular than expected, lawmakers infused $200 million from the general fund into the paid leave account. The money provided a cushion and allowed the state to temporarily lower its premium rate. I'm sorry, but why are we coming up with programs that we can't pay for? I mean, that you can't run a private business that way. You can't run your household that way. You can't just buy stuff that you can't afford to have. You can't pay for things you can't afford to have. This state loves to just make these ridiculous programs that it can't fund, and now they're going to come back and tax us even more than what we're being taxed already. We can't afford to be taxed any more than what we are. Another funding boost like this is unlikely anytime soon as the state grapples with deep budget challenges. Officials are also frustrated about how the rate for premiums has to be set each year under state law. The current formula looks backward, using the past as its baseline for calculating future needs. Late last year, an audit found this contributed to the program's potential long-term insolvency. The Employment Security Department prefers an actuarial approach that is more forward-looking. States with similar initiatives take this approach to setting tax rates, and this is akin to how contributions are calculated for Washington workers' compensation system. Last year's audit recommended shifting to this method. A bill in the legislature looked to make this change this year. Senate Bill 5292, spearheaded by Conway, passed the Senate nearly unanimously before stalling in the House. Changing the approach to calculating premiums wouldn't secure the program's financial future. The 1.2% cap on premiums would remain. After Conway's bill passed the Senate, lawmakers in the state House tried to shoehorn in an increase to the premium rate to 2% by 2033 in an attempt to address the looming deficit. The legislation died in the House, likely due to that change, Conway said, but the measure can be revived in the next legislative session beginning in January. Senator Curtis King, Republican in Yakima, opposes raising the cap on premiums. It's asking a lot of workers, while the state is also now taxing wages to fund Washington's long-term care program. Another sham, another socialist program, which workers have to pay for. Workers get to pay for the long-term care of people who retire, which is an absolute joke because the maximum benefit is like $35,000 that you can use. That will literally pay for nothing if you need long-term care after you're retired, when you get old, or any time if you need long-term care. If you have to stay in some kind of a nursing home, any decent nursing home, you can expect that to cost about $15,000 a month. So 2 months, they tax the crap out of your wages for your whole life. An 18-year-old who goes to work and starts paying this tax will pay upwards of $100,000 over his work career into that program. But you don't get even half of that benefit back. This is socialism. This is transfer of wealth. This is making people pay for stuff for other people. I'm sorry you didn't plan for your retirement or future medical issues you may have, or decide to put some money back, but that's not my problem. That's yours. The top Republican on the Senate Labor Committee, Commerce Committee, he added that this affects lower income workers more. Yeah, you're taking more out of their check. More money that they need to survive now, day to day. He instead would like to see the conversion focus on cutting back the number of weeks of paid leave people are eligible for, or restricting the events that qualify for eligibility. We got to start looking at just how generous is this program, King said. How much of this can we afford to do, and how much are people really willing to pay into a program that a lot of them will never use? Another idea floated has been raising what is called the taxable wage base, Conway said. Workers only pay taxes to support the program on earnings up to this amount, currently $176,100. If you can't afford the program, then there should be no program. We need to stop legislating and passing laws on our emotions or how we feel, or that we feel sorry for people because they can't do this or that. This is life. But the rest of us who work every day and expect to take home a fair paycheck shouldn't be paying for other people who want to take time off for whatever reason. It's not my job to take care of or pay for people that I don't even know, people who aren't in my family. You should not be taking taxes out of my check to pay for other people's paid time off or nurse. Well, we've been talking about last week how Washington State loves its criminals and how criminals get so many breaks in this state. And now we just have more breaks for the criminals. Washington has abandoned its effort to force Catholic priests and other religious leaders to divulge information on child abuse and neglect they learn of in confession. With a pair of legal filings, the state agreed to not enforce the controversial provision. Is it really that controversial? Of a new state law that adds clergy to a list of professions that must report to law enforcement when they have reasonable cause to believe that a child has suffered abuse or neglect. Stipulations filed in federal court on Friday will largely preserve the law while casting aside the controversial component related to confessions. Catholic bishops and Orthodox churches sued over that element, arguing it was unconstitutional. The agreements the state reached in those cases reflect the preliminary injunction issued by a federal judge that has prevented the state and counties from enforcing the confessional reporting provision since the law took effect July 27th. Lawmakers approved the law during this year's legislative session. Governor Bob Ferguson signed it in May. The Trump administration is also waiting on the case, siding with the churches. Sorry, I don't agree with this at all. In the case brought by three Catholic bishops, U.S. District Court Chief Judge David C. Estrudillo ruled that requiring disclosures on information learned in confession infringed on their First Amendment right to practice religion and would force priests to violate their sacred vows or face punishment by the state.
State attorneys concluded that given the judge's reasoning, settling the legal fights now was the best possible outcome. It keeps crucial portions of Washington's mandatory reporting law in place while also preserving the legislature's authority to address issues with the law identified by the court. Catholic leaders and their lawyers celebrated the legal victory. Preventing abuse and upholding the sacred seal of confession are not mutually exclusive. We can and must do both, said Jean Hill, executive director of the Washington State Catholic Conference. That's why the church supported the law's goal from the beginning and only asked for a narrow exemption to protect the sacrament, she said. We're grateful the state ultimately recognized it can prevent abuse without forcing priests to violate their sacred vows. Do their vows include not fucking kids in the ass? Doesn't seem to, because we're talking about a church that historically, the Catholic Church, has tons of child abuse, tons of sexual abuse by its priests. I think this is disgusting. It's just disgusting. There are some fights worth fighting for. This is one of them, said Mary Dispenza of the Catholic Accountability Project. Priests are not above the law. This secrecy or priest privilege fails children and keeps perpetrators safe. Yes, something this state excels at, keeping perpetrators safe. Able to molest and assault children again and again. The federal judge who blocked Senate Bill 5375 is putting the law above the life and protection of children. Senate Bill 5375 added clergy to the state's list of individuals legally required to report suspected child abuse to law enforcement or the Department of Children, Youth, and Family Services, also a worthless, useless organization that fails time and time again. Department of Children, Youth, and Family Services. A member of the clergy is defined in the legislation to cover any regularly licensed, accredited, or ordained minister, priest, rabbi, imam, elder, or similarly positioned religious or spiritual leader. I think it is disgusting. At what point do we decide that criminals don't have all the rights in this state? At what point? Continuing on the criminal civil war front that's going on in these blue cities against federal troops. On October 8th, Seattle Mayor Bruce Harrell signed 2 executive orders to prepare the city for the possibility of an unlawful federal troop deployment by the Trump administration. The action was a direct response to the administration's stated interest in deploying federal military forces to U.S. cities, including Seattle, which Harrell has described as a military occupation. Key elements of the executive orders: controlling local law enforcement. The orders reinforce local control over the Seattle Police Department, ensuring that police and city employees will not enable the abuse of power from the federal government. Legal preparedness. The mayor's office will work with the city attorney to explore and prepare all available legal options in the event of federal overreach. The goal is to be ready to fight in court if troops are deployed without proper consent. Protecting immigrant and refugee communities. The orders include measures to protect vulnerable communities from unjust immigration enforcement actions. How are they unjust? If you are here illegally, then it's not unjust. You are breaking the law and you are subject to deportation. It's pretty simple. It's federal law. And these cities can pass all these little, whatever you want to call it, little laws and executive orders and whatever, but federal law trumps local. Sorry. This includes banning face masks for law enforcement agents during protests and requiring them to display clear identification. You can't force a federal officer to not wear a face mask. What are you going to do about it? How are you going to enforce that? You are pitting law enforcement against law enforcement. This is this becomes civil war. Creating a task force, a Seattle Resilience Task Force, will be created to prepare the city for potential deployment by educating communities about their rights and setting up a process to report alleged improper acts by federal troops. Again, what are you going to do about it? You going to send the cops after them? You going to pit the police against the police? Coordination with state officials. The city will coordinate with the Washington State Governor and Attorney General to ensure a unified front against potential federal actions. The executive orders were preceded by earlier calls from Harrell for federal forces to stay out of Seattle. Mayor's concerns came after the Trump administration deployed troops in other U.S. cities such as Portland and Chicago and signaled that it might do so in Seattle. I don't necessarily support the idea of federal troops being on the ground in cities, but I'm also tired of seeing the lawlessness that's allowed to go on in these cities like Portland and sometimes in Seattle, where the so-called police sit back and just let these thugs do whatever they want, destroy property, destroy businesses, harass people, assault people, and do nothing about it. That needs to end. They need to enforce the law and stop allowing this stuff to go on. And while we're talking about ICE, ninth graders in the Highline, Washington School District have been assigned a fictional novel that talks about ICE agents raping migrants in the ass. Only in Washington, right? This book is called The Book of Unknown Americans. It's written by a Christina Henriquez, I believe is what her name is. Here's a couple of excerpts from the book. And this is supposed to be an ICE agent talking. I've been thinking about all the things I could do to her. Tell her to take her clothes off. Stop. Have her suck my dick. Below that, something about the floor and rubbed himself dry, the hair matted on his barrel chest, his limp penis hanging between his stocky legs. And then later talking about disposing of people, burned up so bad that when someone finds them, their skin is black and their lips are cracked open. Another half of them drowning in rivers. And half after that picked up by Lawmaker and sent back to where they came from, or beaten or arrested. What world are we living in when a school teacher or a school district thinks this is a good idea? You are putting, between garbage like that and these local politicians blowing this up into some huge deal, you are pitting people against these agents when they come to town. This is why they're being attacked. You are brainwashing people, giving them misinformation. These politicians, these school officials, that author, they should be locked up. Why are you allowed to put out information like that and act like it's real? The amount of mental health disorders in this state, in the West Coast, the left coast, with its citizenry and the people in charge, is off the charts. The mental illness. The lack of ability to deal with real life. It's mind-boggling to me. Well, some Democrats seem to see the error of their ways. A Washington State Democrat lawmaker is expressing regret and guilt over legislation she supported that she believes has contributed to an explosion in juvenile crime and lives lost. Representative Lauren Davis from Shoreline, Democrat, penned an op-ed in the Seattle Times last weekend detailing 8 different policies that have contributed to the juvenile crime wave. Davis spoke with the Center Square on Monday, sharing that during her first years in the legislature, she voted on bills she didn't fully understand and was afraid to speak up. I would say probably in my 4th and 5th legislative sessions, I did not understand that some of the policies were flawed, but I was too afraid to say anything, she said. And it's only been in my last 6th and 7th legislative sessions that I finally grew thick enough skin or had enough courage to say the right thing in spite of whatever consequences might flow my way, because I have to go home to my district and I have to be able to look myself in the mirror. Davis, who represents parts of North Seattle, Shoreline, and Linwood, said she has spent a great deal of time educating herself about the impact of several public safety bills passed by the majority party. I have sat with weeping mothers, constituents of mine whose children were slain by fellow teenagers, she wrote in the op-ed. Juvenile arrests in Linwood, a city in my legislative district, have nearly tripled from 130 in 2022 to 355 in 2024. During these heartbreaking meetings, I find myself racked with guilt. I am culpable. Yes, you are, as are the rest of the members of your party. I found out that it was actually the state's own policy that prevented schools from serving in the interceding and referral role in the way that they used to, she said. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that it was dawning on me that these are all related, and it was a revelation for me. Davis said she's well aware that speaking out may not be received well by some. I think it's important that as a policymaker, I'm honest with the public and that I'm honest with my constituents, as they deserve to know, Davis said. I didn't run for office to get reelected. I ran for office to do the right thing and to try to make a difference as long as I'm in this seat. I did not use to speak out. I was not a person who demonstrated political courage. I was fearful of ramifications for my own political party, fearful that something wouldn't land well with voters. You can run afoul of certain interest groups and they will come after you. Yes. Democrats have a decisive majority in both chambers of the legislature. The Center Square reached out to House Speaker Lori Jenkins, Democrat Tacoma, for comment on Davis's pointed criticisms. We're going to have lots and lots of bills coming forward and ideas coming forward, and I'll be interested to see what Representative Davis's are, Jenkins said. The Speaker did not directly respond to Davis suggesting that Democrat policies have created the public safety crisis facing the state, particularly the spike in juvenile crime. There's probably a wide diversity in my caucus, at least on what contributes to what and what helps. I guess I'm used to people critiquing every policy that's passed in the legislature. The real issue is, okay, if you say it should be fixed, what's the fix? Queried Jenkins. The fix is to enforce the law. The fix is for there to be consequences, punishment for committing crime, which right now there is not in Washington. Listen, there's no limit on the policy approach that any member can bring forward and then build the coalition to pass a bill, right? So that's the work of the legislature to do that, she said. So it's just important to remember that there's a lot of perspectives. Representative Davis is one of my 59 in my caucus, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot more discussion this next session. Davis isn't holding her breath when it comes to fundamental changes in public safety legislation in the next session. I tend to be extremely optimistic by nature, but I'm not at this time very confident that there would be adequate votes to reverse on most, if not all, of the items that I highlighted, she said. The focus instead will be on trying to prevent the resurrection of bills from the 2025 session that Davis feels would exacerbate the situation. One I referenced in the op-ed, Senate Bill 5296, nearly passed the legislature, and we were barely able to stop it, she said. The legislation would have modified the juvenile justice system by requiring courts to find that community-based placement was inadequate before committing a youth to a juvenile rehabilitation facility. Let's talk about it instead of just punishing people, right? The ultimate goal of these people is for especially juveniles to never go to jail for any crime, rape, murder, any crime, no jail time. That is their goal. The bill is riddled with problems, Davis said, but at a high level, it takes young people who would go to JR, the juvenile prison system, and sends them back to the community with no wraparound supports and with no enhanced supervision. This is the same community where they've been committing acts of violence. This wasn't the only bill to earn her ire. Another bill that is particularly egregious is Senate Bill 5266, Davis said. That bill would allow a juvenile to murder up to 3 people and get out in 6 years. That was an actual bill that passed multiple committees, and what it would do is incentivize adults 18 and up to engage young people to commit homicide because they can get out in 6 years. So to be clear, the current minimum is 20 years, and this would reduce it to 6. She reiterated that despite some calling on her to resign since the op-ed, she remains energized. Why are people okay with not giving criminals jail time? Have you never been a victim of anything? Are you this naive that you think that community-based resources are somehow better than just good old-fashioned jail time? Jail is a deterrent. You'll never know how many people didn't commit a crime because they thought they might go to jail, because they didn't want to sit in a cell for years. You'll never know. But we are seeing that knowing that you're not going to go to jail has had a huge increase in crime. Knowing that you're not going to be sentenced to anything serious in this state, crime is up. No matter what they tell you, crime is up. I see it every day. When is enough enough? You're getting hammered with taxes everywhere. Gas, your paycheck, the store, everywhere you go to pay for all this garbage that these idiots put into legislation. You're seeing homelessness explode, and they just keep throwing hundreds of millions of dollars at it with no accountability. There's all kinds of fraud going on with these programs that are getting state tax money to pay for homelessness, and you've seen zero improvement in homelessness. In fact, it's only gotten worse. Criminals being released constantly back to the streets to commit more crime and more crime. Nothing gets done. Why do you keep voting for these people who do not have your best interest in mind? When will enough be enough?